Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual review crew, Mike Tagliere and Scott Barrett. A lot of action to get into this week, a lot of weird numbers, and for some reason, Ajayi hits 200 yards again, but we'll get into that. But let's just jump right in, guys. First up, we've got Jets and Ravens. The Jets do beat the Ravens. A little bit of a surprise because you had Geno starting and then Geno get knocked out, and then Ryan Fitzpatrick come in and lead them to victory. So, but first, let's talk about the running game here because I thought that was interesting. So, Scott, Matt Forte had 30 carries to Bilal Powell's 4. There was a couple of weeks there where we thought they might be splitting a little more time, but apparently not. Apparently Matt Forte came back with a vengeance. Is that something we should expect?
Yeah, so I don't know. This was his first bell cow game since week 2 when he also had 30 carries. Today, like you said, he had 30 carries and 4 targets to Bilal Powell's 4 carries and 0 targets. And that's really interesting because Bilal Powell is supposed to be the receiving running back, but 0 targets, that's a big sign. And I know the Jets have been getting a lot of questions about, hey, what's going on with Forte? And he said, really, he's just not getting the blocks, but we haven't noticed any decline in his play. Maybe they've recommitted to using him in a bell cow fashion. Definitely something to be excited about for next week. Hoping it continues.
So, Mike, let's look on the other side of the ball. You've got the Ravens who they continue to be a mess offensively. I think that's fair to say. So, as a team, they only ran it 12 times. Terrence West led the team, which is not saying a whole lot, with 8 carries for 10 yards. Joe Flacco, inefficient as usual, 25 of 44 for 248. 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And we'll get to Mike Wallace in a minute. But between Flacco and the running game, there's not a lot to like here, is there?
There's really not. In touching back on Forte and what he did today, the Ravens had some serious injuries on their defense today. I think they were missing 3 starters in their front 7. So that could have had something to do with it. But it was more of the fact that the Ravens couldn't get anything going. So the Jets pretty much got to do whatever they wanted on offense. Forte's not going to get 30 carries again. He shouldn't. He really shouldn't. But going back to the Ravens, I didn't like Terrence West this week. He was actually in my DFS fades article. It's just because the Jets, what people see on national TV, that's what they tend to believe, even if it's just a small 1-game sample. And, the Jets were a victim of it against the Cardinals this past week. David Johnson, yeah, he had 111 yards and a touchdown or 3 touchdowns. But if you David Johnson, outside of that 158-yard run, he averaged 2.5 yards per carry. Of course, he's going to have those splash plays. Terrence West is a guy that's got to grind it out. He's got to get it over and over and do it. But the Jets, the start to their season, their schedule has been the worst. They have faced the top running backs. I'm not kidding. 5 of the 6 running backs they had faced going into this game were top 10 fantasy players on a point-per-game basis. And the Jets were still only allowing, I think it was 3.6 yards per carry. So I won't take too much away from this for Terrence West. What you should worry about, though, is that I've said this all along. The Ravens aren't going to sit by and let a running back struggle for multiple weeks when they have Kenneth Dixon waiting in the wings. So this is just 1 game, so I'm not going to say that Terrence West is in hot water right now. But if for some reason he has another game where it's kind of lackluster, that's when you should start to worry as a Terrence West owner. But Joe Flacco, if anybody trusts him, they're not really listening to our shows.
That's probably a good point. If you're playing Joe Flacco, then you definitely need to listen to this podcast. All right, well, let's go to one of the bright spots for Baltimore real quick. Mike Wallace, 10 catches, 120 yards. Very good game, Scott. I think it's pretty clear between Mike Wallace and Dennis Pitta. Those are the 2 guys to own in the Ravens passing game, right?
Yeah, as long as Steve Smith is out.
Well, yeah, and that's actually an excellent point because Steve Smith was banged up again today and didn't play. So, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting with Baltimore there. But all right, let's move on to Mr. Ajayi. So the Dolphins win 28-25. Ajayi totals 214 yards, his second straight 200-yard rushing game, added a touchdown. Arian Foster only 3 carries. Scott, I think this is textbook bell cow running back, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's playing lights out. He's our highest graded running back, or our highest graded runner, and our second highest graded running back overall, which is crazy considering he has about 100 snaps less than everyone else close to him. He has over twice as many rushing yards as the next closest back over the past 2 weeks. He's forced 13 missed tackles over that time. The next closest running back only has 7 on the ground. 7.7 yards per carry. He ranks for the season only behind Le'Veon Bell in yards after contact per attempt. The volume's there, and he's doing wonderful things with it. I'm really excited, and I'm not worried about Arian Foster at all.
And then in the receiving game, Mike, so an interesting line. So you had Jarvis Landry and Kenny Stills actually split or tie for the team lead in targets. But Kenny Stills did have a pretty decent day, 5 for 100 and a touchdown. Also had a very ugly drop. I don't know if you were able to catch that. He had a probably surefire touchdown drop too. But, I mean, you know, you've got Landry, obviously the PPR machine, and then Stills is sort of the home run guy. You know, is that sort of what we could expect rest of the season? That's just sort of the good and the bad with this Dolphins passing game.
What's really frustrating is Devontae Parker there's no way. I mean, I don't even know if at this point you can roster him. He's going to have weeks here and there where he does something, but he's never someone you're going to be able to trust. This was a tougher matchup for him. The perimeter corners for Buffalo are really good. But Kenny Stills, no, I really can't get behind it. Even though if you go through the game log, I want to say that he's led this team in fantasy points in 3 weeks. Which really sucks because nobody wants to play Kenny Stills because he's going to have those weeks where he has 1 catch for 19 yards, and it's going to be really, really volatile. But Jarvis Landry for me was the story. Just 6 targets. So every week we're seeing, like over the last 3 weeks, he hasn't reached 10 targets, which was something he had done in, I think it was like the last 12 games or something like that with Tannehill. So ever since the emergence, I guess, the outbreak of Ajayi, you're seeing the target levels go down for Jarvis Landry. So that's, I guess, my big takeaway from this game is that we're starting to see a trend with Jarvis Landry and his target totals going down as the weeks go on. I think Adam Gase is starting to realize that Ryan Tannehill is not the guy you want to run your offense through.
Well, and actually, yeah, no, that's a good point, though, Mike, because remember the knock last year on the Dolphins was, hey, you've got a really good running back in Lamar Miller. You just don't use him nearly enough. Right. And now, like you said, Gase is really giving it to Ajayi. At least he has the last 2 weeks. And look, it's working. I mean, he's getting 30 carries, but getting 200 yards. But that might mean, Jarvis Landry sees a little less attention. So, Scott, what do you want to add on that?
Yeah, I just want to say I wouldn't be too concerned with Jarvis Landry in terms of maybe target share. He faced Nickel Roby, easily the Bills' best cornerback this week. And then Stills was facing Ronald Darby on the majority of his targets. And Darby was giving up the 14th most fantasy points per snap in coverage heading into the week. So it's just like a matchup thing, I suspect at least. But I do agree that going forward, they're probably going to lean heavy on the run game because that's proved to work.
Yeah, Darby struggled this year. I know he's been hurt. He was dealing with injuries for a couple weeks there. Darby, but if you go looking last year, Darby and Gilmore they're 2 really good cornerbacks. Like if they can get their stuff together, Nickel Roby was the weak point last year, and this year he's the strong point. So if they could, actually the Bills have been pretty good this year, so I shouldn't say that, but they have a really good trio of cornerbacks. Darby's been the weak point as of so far, but I don't know if it still has to do with his lingering injury. That one play to Stills today, I did see that one. He just didn't even know where the ball was. Stills kind of stopped and just snagged the ball, and it was a long touchdown. So that was really the only big play they gave up all game, outside of Ajayi's 200-something yards. By the way, am I the only one that's shocked there's only been 4 running backs to have back-to-back 200-yard games? That was kind of shocking to me that only 4 running backs all time have done that. That was just I don't know.
I'm a little surprised. I mean, I'm not that surprised because 200 yards is a big deal for a guy to do it once, let alone 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I
I
guess.
don't remember. I mean, you got to count the number of times on one hand that you've seen a guy run for 200 yards, let alone twice in a career, let alone twice in a row.
Well, my question is, how many besides Ajayi next week will have done it 3 weeks in a row?
That is the question.
I think Ajayi's on a bye week next week.
Then it's even more impressive.
There you go.
Why do the schedulers have to take that away from us? That's just but I mean, look, after the bye week, because you are correct, Scott, he isn't a bye week. He does play the Jets, who Mike just got done saying has faced nothing but top running backs this season. So.
Oh, he will be such a fade for me. Seriously, I will tell people. I can't wait for him to be so highly owned, and I'm going to tell people don't touch him. Don't touch Ajayi against the Jets.
All right, one more note on this game I did want to cover. So obviously Sammy Watkins has been out for a little bit. Robert Woods, who was sort of next man up for Buffalo, also out. You had Marquise Goodwin, of all people, lead the Bills in receiving, 4 for 93. Did also lead the team in targets. So, Mike, let's go to you on that. Is there anything there as far as Bills receivers go, or are these guys, okay to fade as long as Watkins and Woods are out?
Yeah, no, they're okay to fade. It was a good matchup for them, even though Robert Woods was out. He'll come back most likely next week because he was questionable to play this week. And, he'll come back. But the big story here we know for the Bills is LaShawn McCoy. And the idiot I am so flustered about the whole entire thing because, this morning when you heard the reports, I was like, oh, these are pre-tweets that these guys put, Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, that they just they were something they put in last night as a time tweet. It came out. There's no way if it is in fact a hamstring strain, there's no way they put him on the field because hamstrings, you can't say we're on a pitch count. No, it's not the way the hamstrings work. It's either it's healed or it's a hamstring injury or it's not. And what they require is time. And to put him out there, I don't care if he tells you, I want to play, coach. I don't care. Rex Ryan, this is stupid. This was the dumbest thing. It really annoys me. And now they deserve to lose this game. They did. And honestly, it wouldn't shock me if they lose McCoy for a couple weeks. His agent, after this injury happened, his agent said he's probably going to miss this game and maybe even another one. So now going forward, you have to legit wonder how much time LaShawn McCoy is going to miss because they were idiots and put him on the field. But Scott, if I were to tell you going into this game that you could play both Gillislee and LaShawn McCoy in one of your DFS spots, right? We'll say we'll give it to you in one of your DFS spots. You probably would have played that regardless of the amount because you're oh, I'll get the production. They were both neither of them did anything.
Yeah, combined 13 carries for 31 yards on the ground and literally nothing in the air. So there you go.
Yeah. It was a great rant, Mike. I want to applaud you.
I was going to say, how do you really feel, Mike? But that's okay.
I get flustered when it's just a stupid thing.
Okay. Well, let's go to even more stupid play, Mike, and the Raiders and the Jaguars. The Raiders do win 33-16. We'll get to Bortles in a minute, but I think the most interesting part about this game, at least from a fantasy perspective, you did have the return of Latavius Murray, and after a few weeks of him and Richard and Dwayne Washington sort of, literally splitting carries, Murray was really, the lead back, and it wasn't even close. He had 18 carries. Washington was next with 5. Richard had 1. Now, he wasn't exactly effective on a per carry basis, but he did have 2 touchdowns. So, Scott, what do we make of this game for Murray? I mean, is this, something we can expect from him, or are better days ahead for him?
I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things where, you have a girlfriend, you don't treat her right, and she's like, I'm leaving, and you're like, oh, whatever, I don't care. And then, after 2 weeks, start seeing some other girls, you're like, oh, man, I really missed her. Mm-hmm. She was great.
We've all been there, Scott. We've all been
now
there.
You're ready to give her your all. And hopefully that's what this week was. I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. Just know that the upside is there. This is easily a top 3 offensive line in the NFL. So I don't know.
So, Scott, you're in that 2-week period then, right? You're not ready to welcome Murray back. You're pushing him away at this point and thinking you can do better. Is that right?
Maybe a little bit, yeah.
Okay. It should be noted, the Jaguars have given up only the 21st most fantasy points to running backs, and he did have 2 touchdowns, so he did salvage a day. But the point is made. He had a tough day. What about you, Mike? What do you think about Murray and that whole situation?
He's kind of been like the Melvin Gordon of the Raiders offense, just without the volume. No, he's 6th in the NFL in rushing touchdowns, and he missed 2 weeks. All he does is score touchdowns. He was doing it on limited work before he got hurt. And this game, to see him get 18 carries, I think it was, that's a monster workload. I was actually really shocked because before this game, I was still receiving questions of whether or not somebody should plug in DeAndre Washington in their flex. I'm like, the guy didn't even perform when Murray was out of the lineup. What makes you think he's going to perform with Murray in the lineup? So, DeAndre Washington is almost like waiver wire fodder for me right now. I don't really think that I don't even know if he has handcuff value because we've already been there. We've done that. And he had a decent matchup in one of those 2 games as well. So to see Latavius Murray punch it in as much as he is, I don't think that there's any reason the Raiders should go away from him. Their defense is slowly getting a little bit better. I'm not going to say they're totally cured. Blake Bortles definitely has something to do with that. But Latavius Murray, I mean, I'm buying as an RB2. I'm not excited in saying like, oh, he's an every week must play RB1. In tough matchups, I'm not going to like him. Like if he were to play the Jets, I wouldn't like Latavius Murray. But if he were to go and, let's say he were to play the Jaguars again, or play the Jaguars, I would like Latavius Murray in a matchup. So he's matchup dependent, but overall, I'd give him like a low end RB2 type ranking.
Okay. One more thing on the Raiders, Scott. So you've got Michael Crabtree, led the team across the board, receptions, yards, targets. He did have a touchdown, proving that he is the Raiders version of Eric Decker, which all he does is score touchdowns. And Amari Cooper, 4 for 29 on only 5 targets. I mean, clearly not as targeted as Cooper or even Seth Roberts today. So, I mean, it's just, is it hard for people to keep, I mean, you got to play Cooper. I'm not saying you should bench Cooper, but it's almost like you got to look at the matchups for these 2 guys between Crabtree and Cooper and sort of roll with that.
Yeah, I think it's just going to kind of be inconsistent. I felt like Crabtree was due this week. Through weeks 3 and 4, he had 23 targets. And then over the last 2 weeks, he had only 11 targets. I feel like that's just kind of what it is. I'm not ready to buy into Amari Cooper as an elite wide receiver 1. I have him in the mid to high wide receiver 2 range. I think that it's just going to be inconsistent. And like you said, Crabtree's kind of like a Decker role player who scores a lot of touchdowns. Also, I want to know, Mike, do you know if Jalen Ramsey shadowed Cooper this week?
Yep. And that's why, like, for me, I kid you not, I talked about it this morning. I said that this is a week where I would bet on Crabtree, even though he's cheaper. I'd play him in DFS over Cooper just because the matchup. Jalen Ramsey's been actually pretty decent. Like, Alshon Jeffrey made some plays against him the previous week, but I was watching every snap, and Jalen Ramsey's a big physical corner. He's going to be really good. And that's why I was worried about Cooper this week. It was just like Devin House has been awful. Prince Amukamara, meh. So I was actually on Crabtree this week. I liked him, but Amari Cooper's going to have his weeks. But Jalen Ramsey, yeah, he did shadow.
Okay. One more thing on this game with the Jaguars. Blake Bortles disappointing again. 23 of 43 for 246, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. I don't know, Scott, is it ready to sell on Bortles and the whole Jaguars offense at this point?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know what you can get. I don't know what you can get though.
Well, okay, maybe sell was the wrong word. Maybe you should avoid Bortles and the Jaguars offense if you can help it. All right, let's move on to the next game, which was
really quick, by the way.
Yeah.
Allen Robinson was our worst rated wide receiver this week.
Well, and that jives. I mean, didn't you have the stat where he performed really well against bad competition last year, but against good competition, he kind of suffered? I mean, and I don't know where the Raiders necessarily ranked as far as, secondary goes, but, you brought a very good point about Robinson even last year. It wasn't like he was elite against everybody. He definitely picked his battles and just went to town on them. So
I think it's more Bortles. I don't even know if I'd say. I know Robinson got a negative grade today, and he's had. I'm not going to say he hasn't had his downs. And I think if you watch, I tried to watch a good portion of this game, and Allen Robinson, he's flustered. He's like so frustrated, and that can actually go into his performance too. So if Blake Bortles, his performances keep dragging him down, it's going to eventually get into Allen Robinson, and he might drop a pass here or there just because he's flustered. I do believe Allen Robinson, if you're in like a dynasty league, I think now's the time to buy on Allen Robinson because eventually the Jaguars are going to realize that Blake Bortles is not very good and they may have to go elsewhere. I'm not going to say it's this year or even next year. It might take half of next year for them to realize Blake Bortles is not that good and he's not a franchise quarterback for them to draft one. But good thing for Allen Robinson, he's really young and he's very talented.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the Lions and the Redskins. You had a couple of actually decent days at the quarterback. So Kirk Cousins, 300 yards and a touchdown. Matt Stafford continues to impress, 266 and a touchdown, including that late game winner to Anquan Bolden. As far as the running game goes, though, because I thought that was more interesting. So on the Redskins side, you had Matt Jones, 10 carries for 27 yards and a fumble. But Chris Thompson sort of supplemented that, 12 for 73. So, Scott, I mean, it seems like they're splitting more and more, the Redskins are, in the run game. Is there any chance that Thompson sort of supplants Matt Jones anytime soon?
Well, I think Jones got benched today for fumbling.
Right.
So, yeah, I could definitely see it. You know all along every week, you're like, is it time to buy into Matt Jones? And I'm like, I hate him. I don't ever want it to
That's
be.
why I keep going. I'm just testing you. All right. Well, let's go to the passing game then. And this was an interesting stat line. So you had Marvin Jones, Mike, who, he's sort of been seeing less attention the last couple of weeks, and people are wondering, is it time for the drop off? But he saw 4 for 94. He caught 4 for 94 on 5 targets. So a productive day. I mean, that's sort of what his MO is. He doesn't see a lot of targets and a lot of catches, but he makes the most of them. On the flip side, you had Golden Tate with 12 targets, caught half of them, 6 for 93. A lot of people were expecting a big day from Tate. Were they expecting a bigger day maybe?
I wasn't expecting a huge day from Tate. I wanted to sit back and wait. He was going to be matched up with Rashad Breeland for a lot of the time. He also goes into the slot, so him and Bolden had better matchups. And the fact that Theo Riddick is out, it's going to feed more targets into those two. So I did like Tate. I didn't think he'd have that big of a game. But the real story for me, like Marvin Jones, I didn't think he'd see a whole lot of targets this game because he was going to be matched up with Josh Norman. He beat Norman on that deep ball, even though he didn't really beat him, I should say, but it was a fantastic catch that he made. And Norman actually was diagnosed with a concussion. So then that's where his, like, all of his yardage came after that play. So it was like the one big play he beat Norman, then Norman was out of the game because Marvin Jones, like, I think it was through halftime, he wasn't even targeted. So my concern with Jones is that he's only seen 15 targets over the last 3 games. He hasn't seen double-digit targets since way back in week 2. So you're kind of seeing Tate get more involved, and it's kind of playing into the situation that we thought heading into the season. We all liked Marvin Jones because he was a lot cheaper than Golden Tate, and then things started to even out, and it was like, okay, this is more of like how it's supposed to be. And unfortunately, the Lions' offense is starting to even out as well. I don't know if it's for the better of their offense because I'm not in love with Golden Tate. I also believe he dropped 2 passes today. But for Marvin Jones, unfortunately, he's settling in as more of like a wide receiver 2/3, kind of like in that range, rather than, the borderline wide receiver 1 that we thought he might be after the first 3 weeks.
Right. And then on the other side of the ball with the Redskins, we had sort of talked about this offline before we started. So you had Jamison Crowder, led the team in targets with 9 and receptions with 7, yards with 108. And at first, we kind of talked about, maybe that's because Jordan Reed was out, who is out with concussion issues. But you had Vernon Davis, who filled right in with 6 for 79 on 6 targets. So, Scott, I guess the question is, is this going to be indicative of the Redskins' passing game going forward, or is it going to be, Deshaun Jackson 1 week and maybe Pierre Garçon another week? I mean, Josh Johnson's out for a while with the on the injured reserve. So what can we expect from these guys?
Yeah, well, Deshaun Jackson had a rough matchup this week, shadowed by Darius Slay. It's one of our top 5 highest graded cornerbacks. I want to say play Golden Tate every week that Eric Ebron and Theo Riddick are out. Play every slot receiver against the Detroit Lions and play Vernon Davis when Jordan Reed's out.
Except Tavon Austin.
Who's the worst? Yeah. He had 15 targets and 53 yards today.
He caught like 10 passes. I was like, oh, Tavon, you're a week too late.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that, believe me. All right, so let's move on. We've got Bengals and Browns. The Bengals do win 31-17. Mike, the big story, and yes, you can toot your own horn on this. Jeremy Hill, 168 yards on 9 carries and a touchdown. I mean, he had a couple of big runs. There's no doubt about it. So, I know you were sort of looking for a breakout game. So take us through that.
It really was. I'd said to you before more that I felt like Jeremy Hill was being unfairly hated to this point. Has he played great? No, I'm not even going to say he has, but he didn't. He was playing against literally. He had the worst opening to his schedule. But he actually did pretty well considering how bad his schedule was. He was also dealing with an injury against the Dolphins, and then last week he was still. It just something was wrong. And then to see today him like blowing it up, and then all of a sudden. He was leading with a chest/shoulder injury, so I don't know if it's the same one that's kind of like recurring. I have no idea what's going on. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to pretend to be. I'm just saying that Jeremy Hill is a better running back than Gio Bernard. I know that they're different running backs. You and I were talking about that. And yes, they're different running backs, but if you tell me I get to take one of these running backs to put on my franchise that I'm starting, it would 100% be Jeremy Hill. Unfortunately, he might be injured, and it seems like this injury is going to linger, which is frustrating. But yeah, I was happy to see Jeremy Hill kind of have the game he did.
Okay. You had a couple of other big performances. Andy Dalton, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns. AJ Green did his thing, 8 for 169 and another touchdown. Scott, so Tyler Eifert came back this week, only saw 2 targets, 1 for 9. I mean, obviously there's going to be, some time to sort of get him warmed up, but what do you expect with Eifert the rest of the way?
So I just want to say I have an interesting stat on Jeremy Hill. So
Okay.
Going into the week, he ranked 47th in yards per carry. And after this week, he ranks 8th. So it's definitely
if you average 18 yards a carry. That'll do it for you.
Yeah, I'm super excited about Andy Dalton. He's been a guy I've been targeting in trades for the past few weeks. I really don't think we can underestimate Tyler Eifert's role to this team and to Andy Dalton. Trying to pull up the stat. So I have it right here. Okay. So in Tyler Eifert's career, in games that he's played with Andy Dalton has averaged 23 fantasy points per game when he has played and 18.8 fantasy points per game when he hasn't. Last season, when Andy Dalton targeted Tyler Eifert, he had a 144 QB rating and a 12-0 touchdown to interception ratio. When targeting anyone else, he had a 94 QB rating and a 13-7 touchdown to interception ratio. So really, this guy makes a huge difference for Andy Dalton, especially in the red zone. Really excited for his prospects going forward with Eifert coming back and hopefully playing more snaps.
Okay. All right. That will do it for the first half of the episode. Let's take a quick break, and we'll get to the rest of the Week 7 action after this. All right, everyone, welcome back. Let's get to the Colts and Titans. Colts win 34-26. Good game, Mike, from Andy Luck, 353 yards, or Andrew Luck, excuse me, not Andy Luck, 353 yards and 3 touchdowns. He played a defense that a lot of people were high on, at least going into this game. So is this Luck turning a corner or was this a fluke?
I don't know. It's tough to say because Luck did it without a lot of his options too. Scott and I talked about it on this morning's show, and I talked Scott into Jack Doyle saying that I loved him as a play. And I'm glad that came through because I didn't want to have to eat my words on that. But Andrew Luck, it's going to be neat to see Dante Moncrief get back on the field, which should be any week. But think about it. He was out with Dante Moncrief, his number 2 receiver, Philip Dorsett, his number 3 receiver. I don't even know if we can actually say number 3 receiver.
No,
we'll put it in quotes.
I'm done with Philip Dorsett.
Yeah. Quan Bray, he was the number 4 receiver. He was out. Dwayne Allen, he was out. So it's like all these options were missing, but somehow the Colts managed to put up 34 points on a Titans defense that had actually been really, really good the last couple of weeks. They came into the game with 12 sacks in their last 2 games. I believe they only sacked Luck twice in this game. They were playing a zone coverage against T.Y. Hilton, and that's never a good idea. Hilton burned them on that a few times. Jack Doyle, the fun part about him, he finished with 9, 78, and 1, but he had 10 targets. The one target that he dropped, it was a touchdown. he actually should have had, and it was a drop too. Like he should have caught it. So he should have had 10. I think it would have been 83 and 2. So Doyle is the real story here. And as long as Dwayne Allen is out, Jack Doyle is a tight end 1.
So I agree. And I think Andrew Luck might be playing the best of his career. Although the fantasy points haven't really followed, he's our highest graded quarterback. Last season, he ranked third worst, just in front of Nick Foles and Colin Kaepernick. I actually completely agree. I'm all aboard the Doyle train without Dwayne Allen now. So in 24 career games,
Uh-oh.
Well, Scott was in the middle of a stat, Mike.
He was.
my concern was like, oh, but maybe he's just going to get asked to block more, and Eric Swoop is going to get that role. And that's when Mike was like, no, dude, he's a guard.
We keep losing Scott.
Well, okay. Mike, repeat the story that Scott's trying to get across.
No, what he was saying is he started talking about Eric Swoop and like how like basically was he going to become the new Fleener, or he was going to be the Fleener and that Doyle was going to be held into block. And I was telling Scott this morning that no, like Doyle is a crap blocker. He's not very good at pass blocking or run blocking. So they're going to keep Swoop in to actually play that Doyle role or Allen role, and then have him go out to be he was essentially the number one wide receiver, because I figured they would shade a safety over the top along with like Parrish Cox or Jason McCourty like to T.Y. Hilton. And I figured that Doyle would like insto de facto be like the number one, number two option. So I love Doyle this week, and I'm glad it panned out. We talked about all the missing options they had. So that's the reason I like Doyle so much this week. Well, and Tennessee was really good against the run too, so that helps.
Right, and look, the Colts. I mean, Andrew Luck needs a tight end. He's always needed a tight end. There's never, been a case where he hasn't. So, and look, Doyle he's filling in. I mean, he's doing very good. One more note on this game, Mike, as we await Scott's return. So Delaney Walker had a pretty good game, 7 for 84 and a touchdown. It's not like Walker's been bad this season. It's just maybe been a little more inconsistent than last season. But look, as we've talked before, you've got receivers in Tennessee that just aren't panning out between Tajay Sharp and Andre Johnson and Rashard Matthews. So, is this something that people can expect from Walker going forward, or, do they sort of have to just expect inconsistency the rest of the way?
Yeah, no, I had Walker in my Locks of the Week article I came out with for PFF. And it was basically saying that last week was an outlier in what's been a pretty predictable season for Walker. Yeah, he had the hamstring injury, and that was going to affect him. You always want to give a player a week back to get back from that. And I know he struggled in that game, but the next game he got back on it. Last week, like I said, I think last week was an outlier. So I was betting on him to do well against the Colts today because they had allowed an average about 16 PPR points to the combination of Eric Ebron, Hunter Henry, Zach Miller, and CJ Fedorowicz. So I wasn't too concerned about the Colts and their old linebacking core. But yeah, I'm glad to see Walker get back on track. And hopefully too many people didn't kind of move on from him because, like I said, it was a 1 week thing. He was dealing with the hamstring earlier in the year. So, yeah. I'm not worried about Delaney Walker.
All right, let's move on, and we'll get through these quickly, Mike. Chiefs and Saints. So Chiefs win 27-21. It was an interesting game because I think it was just last week we talked about how Drew Brees seems to be a completely different player on the road as opposed to home, but he was on the road this week and threw for 367 and 3 touchdowns, again, against a good team. I think it's probably too late in Brees' career to say, oh, he's turning a corner as far as playing on the road. But, I mean, you got to like those road games once in a while where he's the typical home Brees, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of me wants to say, well, maybe Michael Thomas is the one that's helping him, turn that corner. But Michael Thomas has been there this year, and Brees has struggled. He struggled on the road against the Giants. We know the Giants have been a better pass defense this year, but there's no reason he should have fell on his face like he did. But I love nothing more than writing my fades of the week, and Brees is in there, and then I get tweets from people saying that, oh, Brees had a really good game. You were wrong on that one. There's no way for you to predict that this game was going to happen. The Chiefs have been really, really, really good at home. Brees has been not so hot on the road. So it matched up, but for Drew Brees, good for him. I know he has a really, really tough slate coming up. He's got the Seahawks next week, and I believe he has the Broncos after that. So his schedule is going to get tougher. But fortunately for him, Michael Thomas is legit. A lot of people are asking me, how many snaps is Michael Thomas playing? All of them. That's how many he's playing, all of them. And he's doing a fantastic job. Today, I want to say he saw 13 targets. So, ride Michael Thomas. He's a wide receiver 3 every single week.
Well, he has led the team in targets 3 times over their last 4 games.
Yeah, he's showing really well.
Well, and I know we talked about it on some episode where it's sort of like him and Snead are kind of mutually exclusive. So you've got Snead, who obviously started out very hot, and Thomas not so much, but now you've got Snead sort of cooling off, which, I mean, that's not to say Snead still can't be good. He had a good day today, 9 for 87. But yeah, it seems like Michael Thomas is sort of coming into his own there.
Yeah, a few months ago, the Saints were saying, "Oh, we want him in that Marquez Colston role," and that didn't really make sense to me, just because he's never played the slot like he did in college, and he hasn't been this season. But I think what they meant by that was he's going to be our possession receiver, and given the targets he's seeing, it really looks like that's true.
Oh yeah, and look, the more he catches them, the more he's going to get the trust of Breeze, and the more he's just going to go to him. You know?
Well, just think he's like the lone big wide receiver that they have. You think about it, like who Breeze has really liked over the years. Jimmy Graham and Marcus Colston, both of them 6'5" or taller. So Michael Thomas, he's 6'4", I believe. He's the only big wide receiver he's got. So if he's in a jam, he's going to look to Michael Thomas.
And then another note on the Saints receiving game. Then we'll move on to the Chiefs, Mike. I know you had tweeted out a very interesting stat about everyone's favorite tight end, Coby Fleener. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, no. So basically, Coby Fleener's snaps are going down every single week. Starting over the first 3 weeks, Coby Fleener had been playing more than 75% of the snaps in every game. And now over the last 3 weeks, he's down to about 54% combined between the 3 weeks. Over the last 2 weeks, actually, Josh Hill has played more snaps than him. I was having like a little sidebar conversation with Jeff Ratcliffe, and he was saying that he believes that they're just kind of using Josh Hill in there as the blocking tight end and just bringing in Coby Fleener as like a passing down guy. So he doesn't think it's going to affect Fleener's production, but I think it gets a little predictable if they keep doing that. So it's going to be interesting to go forward, but it is really concerning for me to see his snap counts dropping as rapidly as they are. You know, like I said, from over 75% every week down to in the 50s. Because Ben Watson last year, the reason you loved him because the targets were there all the time. Ben Watson was on the field. I looked at that, and there was only 2 games last year where Ben Watson played less than 80% of the snaps.
Yeah, and I think he finished second or no lower than third on the team in targets for the season.
He was second,
Today, for example, Coby Fleener, 6th on the team in targets with 2.
Yeah.
So one more note on this game, Scott, that I wanted to ask you about. So Travis Kelce, another disappointing game, at least by his standards. So 2 for 24. I think I wrote down that he's gone 3 weeks in a row with 32 yards or less. So, you know, and look, the Chiefs are winning, so it's not like it's affecting them a whole lot. But what do we make of this drop in production for Kelce?
Yeah, it's just really frustrating. He only had 3 targets. Jeremy Maclin, too, only had 5, and he led the team with those 5 targets. Alex Smith just isn't really passing a whole lot, and he's spreading the ball around a ton, and they're not even really very valuable targets. They're all low average depth of target. I'm kind of worried about both of them. I don't like their ceiling in any given week, and they're both great talents, but just kind of not really in a great spot for fantasy.
But who does that leave the door open for, Mike?
Oh, my guy, Spencer Ware. I love Spencer Ware. He's so good.
I know. We know, Mike. We know. Everyone knows. All right, let's move on. So we got Eagles-Vikings. The Eagles win 21-10. They knocked the Vikings off. Interesting note on this one, Scott. So, you know, we've been waiting for the Jerick McKinnon sort of breakout game for a while, ever since Peterson went down, but they're still splitting carries literally down the middle. Matt Asiata had 12. Jerick McKinnon had 11. And I don't think, you know, well, McKinnon actually did come out for a little bit because he was hurt for a little bit of the game, but then came right back in. So, you know, until they sort of carve out a more definitive role, is this a running situation to avoid?
Yeah, I'm not excited about it at all. McKinnon also hasn't looked good. Actually, every single running back on the team hasn't looked good. Maybe it's just blocking. Yeah.
Well, and it's and now they did play a tough matchup. I mean, Philadelphia has only given up the 26 most fantasy points to running backs, but still, I mean, just the fact that they keep splitting the carries right down the middle is a little disconcerting. Other than that, Mike, let's talk about. I can't believe I'm saying this. Cordarrelle Patterson, who led the team I'm sorry, was third on the team with 7 targets, did lead the team with 7 receptions for 67 yards and a touchdown. Like, this can't be, this can't be right? I mean, this isn't going to happen again. Like, this is peak Cordarrelle Patterson, right?
Well, hold on a second. Hold on. If you talk to anybody that I'm in a dynasty league with, I own Cordarrelle Patterson, and I'm not saying that just like I'm not too. I've been a truther of Cordarrelle Patterson for a long time. I wanted the Vikings to release him before this year, and they said they weren't going to do that. They weren't willing to give up and say that they made a mistake. They didn't make a mistake. He's a fantastic player. They just never gave him an opportunity to actually play the wide receiver position. They were using him as a gadget wide receiver, as a kick returner. It was a joke. I want to see this guy line up like a Dez Bryant. Coming out of college, he looked like Dez Bryant after the catch. Like, you get the ball in this guy's hands and he's magic. I know he makes some boneheaded plays, but that's going to happen with a young receiver. I really wanted him to get a shot, and to see them start the season with Charles Johnson as a starter, I was dying laughing because Charles Johnson was never good. I'm not one of those guys that was always waiting for him to get his shot. Cordarrelle Patterson should have been the receiver opposite of Diggs. And eventually Treadwell's going to get worked into the offense. I know he was inactive today, but Cordarrelle Patterson's a legit wide receiver. Like, his talent is there. They just have to continue to feed him the ball, and good things will happen, as they did today. And honestly, as they did before the bye week, he had a good game as well.
And I can confirm, Mike, because I am in a dynasty league with you, that you do own Cordarrelle Patterson in our dynasty league. So
yep,
it's no BS with you. You're speaking the truth on that. So
yeah.
All right, let's move on to, I'm going to say, undoubtedly the ugliest game of the day. In London, the Giants win 17-10. Case Keenum was really bad. Eli Manning was really bad. I guess a couple of the notes. So, Scott, we had Todd Gurley, 57 rushing yards. Again, not very effective on the ground. But again, as we've talked about several times, it's not really his fault. It's the line's fault, right?
Yeah, they're just stacking the box against him, which kind of makes Case Keenum's 4 interceptions all that more disgusting. That they could just put safeties up in the box and pick those off. One thing about Todd Gurley's game, though, that I'm really excited about is this week he saw 7 targets.
Yeah.
And that's with Cunningham back, and Cunningham wasn't on the injury report the entire week. And last week he had 4 targets to Cunningham's 2. So it looks like going forward he's at least going to be used heavily as a receiver, which is what you're looking for, especially in PPR leagues. So despite the inefficiency, I am bumping him up a bit after this week.
Well, look, hopefully they realized, hey, if he can't make plays on the ground because they're getting to him too fast, maybe we can get it to him through the air, and that's working. So one more note on this game, Mike. So we had Rashad Jennings, who had 9 carries for 15 yards last week, 13 carries for 25 yards this week. Paul Perkins, 2 carries last week, 4 carries this week. Is next week the beginning of the Paul Perkins era here? Do people need to get him off the waiver wire now?
I would love to see Perkins more involved, but they've given us really no reason to think that Paul Perkins is going to be the guy going forward. Like, they've given Bobby Rainey a bigger chance than they have Perkins, so I'm not ready to say that yet. I do believe in Perkins' talent. I would like to see the Giants go to a running back that can be a 3-down back like Perkins. He's a little small, but at the same time, he's running just about as well as anybody else on the roster, including, Rashad Jennings. He's just done. He looks done. He's not running the ball extremely well. I think the biggest note from this game, though, for me, though, is Jeff Fisher after the game. He said that they asked him, are you going to bench Case Keenum, or are you going to play Goff? And he said, I'm going to bench my wide receivers. I'll switch out wide receivers before I switch out Keenum.
And that's why he's 500. So.
That's why he's Jeff Fisher, and that's why the Rams are apparently going to give him an extension.
Wonderful. Can't wait. I want to be an NFL coach when I grow up. All right, let's move on to the afternoon slate. We had the Bucks double up the 49ers 34-17. Jameis Winston, very good game, 269 and 3 touchdowns. Jacquizz Rodgers, 26 carries for 154. Not to be outdone, Peyton Barber, 12 for 84 and a touchdown. Scott, what do we do with this? Because you've got Doug Martin, who nobody knows when he's coming back. The whole reason Jacquizz Rodgers is in there is because Charles Sims got hurt too. So, look, Jacquizz Rodgers looks pretty decent. Is that he's just playing bad defenses, or is there something there?
Well, I mean, this was a dream matchup up against the 49ers, who've just been getting destroyed by running backs all season. So it's a little bit of that. But I mean, going forward, I'll start Jaquiz Rodgers every week as long as Doug Martin's not playing.
I mean, look, if he's going to be averaging 6 yards a carry, I think you kind of have to at that point. Mike, so we had Mike Evans, big game, obviously, 8 for 96 and 2 touchdowns. But I wanted to talk about any receivers you like behind him, because obviously Vincent Jackson's going to be out a while. And they do pass it a lot. So who's there behind Evans? You had Russell Shepard, who had 5 for 77 and a touchdown. You had Adam Humphries, who, some people thought, he's going to step in, but he's still sort of stuck to that slot role and didn't do a whole lot. So who's the guy to own there in place of Jackson?
Russell Shepard actually made some good plays today. I was watching a lot of that game too, and Russell Shepard actually looked pretty solid. I'm not willing to say that he's like a guy that I'm going to start every week, but it's probably someone I'm willing to keep my eye on, because I don't think his name is big enough to command like a big waiver wire presence. I mean, he's definitely someone you want to talk about if you're in a deeper league. Yeah, sure, Adam. He might be someone that you could use for bye weeks in a good matchup. But do remember that this was a great matchup. But the Bucs schedule going forward is great as well. So it's not something you could dismiss, but I just don't know if I'm willing to spend a high waiver priority on him, or like a lot of my acquisition budget if you're going by that way, because it was a fantastic matchup that everything kind of fell in line. There's really not much to say about it here. I know that they wanted to dial back the passes, and Cameron Brate was someone that a lot of people liked this week. And, it's now 2 weeks in a row where they haven't really given him any volume. So he's someone that should be on waiver wires. I don't think he's somebody that you can rely on every week like people thought you could once they released Safarian Jenkins. I think that's the bigger story.
Okay. One more note. So you had Colin Kaepernick, sort of similar line to last week. So 143 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Did add 84 yards on the ground. The Bucs do give up a lot of points on the ground as far as fantasy running backs go. So not real surprising. They gave up 160 yards. But Scott, it sounds like this is what we could expect from Kaepernick. Not a whole lot through the air, but he kind of makes up for it on the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
So. Okay, next afternoon game. Let's move on to Chargers and Falcons. The Chargers win it in overtime, 33-30. Phillip Rivers, a typical Phillip Rivers game, 370 yards and a touchdown. Did have an interception. The receiver du jour this week, Mike, was Tyrell Williams, 7 for 140. Did tie for our old friend Antonio Gates with targets. So, again, is Williams pulling away as far as Chargers receivers go, or is it still sort of a mix and match every week?
Oh, yeah, it's still Williams for me. Like Travis Benjamin, not many people have noticed, but he doesn't even play all the snaps. He's only out there for 3 wide receiver sets. Now, granted, the Chargers run 3 wide receiver sets probably 70% of the time, so he's playing like 70% of the snaps, but he's injured right now. His targets are very inconsistent. Tyrell Williams is the big body. He's kind of taken on that Keenan Allen role. There were definitely, and that's the thing, is that people don't want to admit with Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen was very volatile as well. Like Phillip Rivers is kind of like Drew Brees in that sense, where he'll take the guy you give him. So like Hunter Henry should have had a massive game this week. Antonio Gates probably could have had a massive game. But if the Falcons were wanting to take them away, which they were, they bracketed their coverage a lot to focus on Antonio Gates and stopping him, leaving other players wide open. Melvin Gordon, for instance, on his touchdown that he scored, that receiving touchdown, 3 players flocked to Antonio Gates in the red zone, and they left him wide open in the corner. So that's just like a product of that. But I think Tyrell Williams is the more complete player. So for me, yeah, it's definitely him going forward. And Travis Benjamin is just like a boomer bust wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4.
Okay. Scott, let's talk about Melvin Gordon, who continues to defy the odds, really. I mean, 22 carries for 68 yards, 3 yards per carry, yet 2 rushing touchdowns, and then added 6 catches for 53 yards and another touchdown. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know he's pretty high up on the fantasy rankings just based on the touchdowns. So, I mean, do people keep riding this wave, or do they need to sell high?
Well, shout out to myself for writing up Melvin Gordon in my Contrarian Plays article.
Okay. Well, look, we'll shout out for you, so you don't have to shout out yourself. Okay. That's just sad. We'll shout out for you. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he's due for some touchdown regression. I mean, he's also leading the league in carries inside the 10-yard line and red zone carries. And he's also getting a ton of targets. He saw 7 targets today. And the Chargers keep scoring a ton of points despite really a depleted depth chart, a lot of injuries to key players. This was a great matchup to do it just because the Falcons have been surrendering so many fantasy points to opposing running backs. But yeah, I still like Melvin Gordon a lot going forward. I don't think Hunter Henry is startable anymore. So his snaps have gone down from 81% to 68% to 56% this week. And Gates has risen by a similar amount. Today, Gates out-targeted him 9-3. So I don't think you can start him as long as Gates is back.
Well, and Mike, didn't you mention in the preseason that there was the record that Rivers and Gates were going for?
Yep.
As far as touchdowns for tight ends. So, and I don't think they're there yet. So I'm pretty sure they're just going to do that. And then, like you had mentioned previously, then they'll bench him and then they can move on. But
yeah, I don't believe in Antonio Gates is a player anymore. He's just not very good anymore. He moves like a turtle. I still think they're going to try and get him that touchdown. I think they're still 5 or 6 touchdowns short of that record that they were aiming for. But man, he looks bad.
And also one more note. So Melvin Gordon, I'm pretty sure they just, after no touchdowns last year, the Chargers are just like, screw it, we'll make it up to you. Like, we'll just give it to you every single time. I mean, look, Danny Woodhead being hurt obviously, helps in that regard. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting. And then one more note on the Falcons side, the running back situation there. So you had Tevin Coleman, very effective on the ground, 8 carries, 64 yards, and a touchdown. But let's not forget, people, and yes, Coleman was banged up a little bit, but Freeman still had 15 carries, so almost double for 58 yards, but also saw 5 catches for 42 yards. So, Scott, is it still, Freeman's sort of job and Coleman is just a nice flex play in good matchups, or how do you see that shaking out?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. This running back by committee is so frustrating because they keep scoring points and they're hyper efficient. They're also due for some regression. Like, there's no way Tevin Coleman's going to keep taking every reception to the house. I don't really know. I kind of don't feel great about starting either of them any week, but I'm still starting Freeman in a lot of the leagues I have him. I don't know. What are you doing, Tags?
I told you, I know I told you this morning that I thought Devonta Freeman was a fine cash play this week, especially for what he's doing in the receiving game. 5 catches. I mean, the Chargers, coming into the game, the Chargers allowed the most receptions to running backs. So it didn't surprise me to see him catch that many passes. But going forward, Devonta Freeman is an elite RB1 because Tevin Coleman, he was hurt, like legit hurt. I don't know what it is that it was, but he actually got up off the bench and he tried to move, and like he immediately sat back down. They took him to the locker room right after that. So I think there's something wrong with Tevin Coleman. I don't think it's like a concussion. I don't think it's just something minor. I think it was something major that he could barely even walk on. So it's something to keep an eye on because if he is in fact missing time, we saw Devonta Freeman last year in a workhorse role in this offense that's operating at even a higher efficiency this year. So Devonta Freeman is going to become a must play real soon.
Right. All right, last game of the day. The Patriots beat the Steelers 27-16. Scott, we didn't have so much angry Tom Brady. I mean, he was very efficient, 222 yards, 2 touchdowns. It seemed like it was more the angry LeGarrette Blount game / revenge game on the Steelers. 127 yards, 5 yards a carry, and 2 touchdowns. Again, it's just one of those things where you don't know week to week what the Patriots plan on doing, right?
No, I think last week against the Browns was kind of an outlier for Blunt. I think really anytime you can project the Patriots to win by a touchdown or more, which is what Vegas had for the Patriots today, then you got to play Blunt because he's going to score all of the touchdowns. Yes, he's very touchdown dependent, but he's going to get a ton of carries and all the goal line work. And the Patriots are a fantastic offense, and they're probably going to be at the goal line a lot.
Well, and another interesting note on this game, he was the only running back that got carries today. The only one. No other running back got a carry. So, all right, on the Pittsburgh side, Mike, so we got sort of a preview of what the Steelers will look like without Ben Roethlisberger. Landry Jones, 281 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But I think we're more looking at the other players on the Steelers to see how they were affected. So Le'Veon Bell, 80 yards on the ground, but did add 10 catches for 68 yards through the air. I think that's probably going to be – I mean, I'm not going to say he's going to get 10 catches every game, but he's going to see a ton of work in the receiving game because of checkdowns, right?
He's definitely going to. Landry, he was getting plenty of time to throw too, so it wasn't like New England was bringing a lot of pressure, but he was still checking down to Bell. This game, I felt bad for Le'Veon Bell. Like he was in the game, like they were using him nonstop, and it was just like it was like beating your head against a wall. It's like how many times can you run into a wall? He's such a fun running back to watch, but they're going to burn him to the ground if they keep giving him this many touches. Like he can't keep going like this. Like you saw as the game went on, he started losing some of that burst that he usually has. So to see him 31 touches in a game, I don't really care what age you are. You cannot do that week after week after week. And I know D'Angelo Williams was inactive for this game, but I mean, involve someone else. Didn't they sign Carlos Williams to the practice squad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like I could imagine they could have called him up, at least give him 6-7 touches, like give Bell a breather at some point. But it's good to see that obviously they're going to lean on him going forward. I don't know they have the bye week next week, and for me, honestly, I really don't put it past Ben Roethlisberger to come back after the bye week. I really don't, and I think people that are saying 4 to 6 weeks, I think they're overestimating it. I really do believe he might miss one more game.
Yeah. Well, so a couple notes. So Le'Veon Bell also, like the Patriots, was the only Pittsburgh running back to get a carry today. No one else got even a carry there. But also, I didn't know this, but did either of you guys know Le'Veon Bell's yards per carry has risen every single season he's been in the league?
Oh, yeah.
Like it went from 3.9 his rookie year, and it's up to 5.5 yards through this season. So
yeah, a lot of people. I think it was like 3.6 his rookie year in the regular season, and a lot of people were saying, "Oh, he was very value independent," and he's really, really, really good.
Right. All right. So one more note. So Antonio Brown, there was some concern, Scott, that with Landry Jones in there, he wouldn't be quite as effective. I know he averaged, I think, like 4 for 60. In 4 games last year without Roethlisberger. But this week, 7 for 106, was only second on the team in targets to Le'Veon Bell. So do you feel pretty good with Antonio Brown going forward? I mean, he's going to be good. It's not like you ever not start him. But it seems like he might be the same Antonio Brown with or without Roethlisberger.
No, I don't think so. I think Landry Jones is easily the worst quarterback playing right now. And maybe in the league.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So not really. I mean, you start him every week, probably top 12 upside, maybe still in the or mid wide receiver 2 range. 11 targets is nice. Would have preferred even more. But yeah, I see a huge drop off in efficiency given the quarterback play. Really not too excited until hopefully after the bye when Mike thinks Big Ben's coming back.
I was going to say, we're on record, Mike, so you have the official stance of Roethlisberger.
Well, that's why I said I think that he could return. I think he misses one more game max. I don't think he misses more than one more game. And Antonio Brown, I think he's kind of like so basically while Big Ben's out, I think you have to consider Antonio Brown kind of like DeAndre Hopkins. They're both playing with bad quarterbacks, but they're both like legit great wide receivers. So I think that's why we have to consider them like a wide receiver 1 because they're still going to be heavily targeted even if they have the bad quarterback.
Right. Okay. Well, that will do it for the Week 7 recap in this edition. For Mike Tagliere and Scott Barrett, I'm Michael Moore, and we'll see you next time on the Fantasy Slant.